All right, so last week we got to the text of the book of Proverbs, and the purpose of the collection of Proverbs is given in the preamble in chapter 1, verses 2 through 7. Chapter 1, verses 8 through 19, the father instructs the son to avoid evil associations. And then the message of the remainder of chapter 1 is not to resist woman wisdom. In chapter 2, it portrays the benefits of the way of wisdom. And right when we ended, I gave you this quote summarizing chapter 2 from Tremper Longman. He says, "The father has presented a strong argument and an impassioned plea for his son to accept the wisdom that begins with the fear of Yahweh. Only in this way will he escape life's threats and move toward life and away from death." And as I think you'll see, there are some substantive things given in these 9 chapters, but the overall thrust is to prepare people and to energize them for the wisdom that's going to come. But we'll see there's a fair amount of wisdom in these chapters. Let's pick back up with chapter 3. It says, "My son, do not forget my teaching, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and years of life and peace they will add to you. Let not steadfast love and faithfulness forsake you. Bind them around your neck. Write them on the tablet of your heart. So you will find favor and good success in the sight of God and man. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and do not lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make straight your paths. Be not wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and turn away from evil. It will be healing to your flesh and refreshment to your bones. Honor the Lord with your wealth and with the first fruits of all your produce. Then your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will be bursting with wine. My son, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father the son in whom he delights." Now the father here in this section, chapter 3, verses 1 to 12, in the first 2 verses, the father urges the son to internalize his teachings, for they're a key to a long and peaceful life. And then he urges him in verses 3 and 4, he urges him there to hold fast to the qualities of loyalty, what he calls steadfast love or covenant love. He urges him to hold fast to the qualities of loyalty and faithfulness, which are characteristic of God. You see that in Exodus chapter 34, verse 6. To do that so that both God and people will view him favorably. So here is this wise advice. You need to hold fast to loyalty and faithfulness. Those are qualities that will bless your life if you have those. Then in verses 5 through 8, the son is told that his trust in God must be absolute. You see, he's told in essence in verse 5, he's told there to bet his life on God's truth and wisdom, to trust wholeheartedly in God's way rather than in any contrary course that he in his so-called wisdom may think is better. Now, don't we do that? Don't we oftentimes we have ideas that we think, no, this is the right way to go. And so he's telling him, you have to resist that sense and you go with God. You rely on him. You trust him. He knows better. And so he's saying there in essence that you have to bet your life on God's truth and wisdom. You trust wholeheartedly, even when his way seems contrary to what you and your so-called wisdom think is the best way. You go with his way. According to verse 6, he says the son needs to acknowledge Yahweh in all his paths, meaning that he needs always to walk in God's ways. There are no exceptions. There's no like I walk in God's ways here, here, and here, but over here, I walk in the way I determine is best. No, you need to walk in God's paths and always heed his ways. And as he does so, he says God will make the path straight, which is a way of saying that God will ease the journey of life and he will remove obstacles. That's this idea of taking the path, this kind of path, he'll make it straight. You see, this journey of life, if you will heed God's ways, he will make the journey easier and he will remove obstacles. In verse 7, He's told that rather than being wise in his own eyes, see, rather than thinking that he knows best, he's to fear the Lord. Meaning he is to do what God desires, which involves turning away from evil. Now, as I say, there are times when it looks like the path of evil is really the way to go. It looks like lying is the way to get out of a tight. It looks like stealing something is the way to make up a financial shortfall where you're in need of some money. There are all of these ways where you're pulled to say, this looks like the thing I need to do. And he's warning about that. You always need to do what God calls you to do. God's path of life is one that generally leads one to being healthy and refreshed. So you see, a sinful lifestyle, it's not only spiritually destructive, it can be physically destructive as well. You can see that in certain situations, right? You can see what alcoholism does to somebody, for example. What drug addiction does to somebody, for example. You can think of many other things where there are physical manifestations of leaving God's path, physical detriment, and no doubt in ways that we don't yet appreciate. And he says in verses 9 and 10, he speaks of honoring God with one's wealth as an aspect of the trusting and fearing of God that he's just mentioned. This honoring God with one's wealth. See, giving up some of one's wealth in accordance with God's will is one of the ways one exhibits trust in and fear of Yahweh and God will as a general proposition. As a general proposition. God will bless the one who does so. He will honor that person by providing a material abundance. In other words, the faithful steward will be supplied additional wealth to manage. If you exhibit before God that you are a good steward of what he gives you, so that you take the things and you use them the way God wants you. He says here, use these things in this world for my glory. And you take those things and you use them as his steward, and you're doing that, well, he as a general proposition will give you more to manage that way. He'll give you more wealth to manage. Now, it's a mistake to read this reward of material abundance as an absolute promise. It is a mistake to read it that way. God can have reasons for depriving the faithful. You see, whether it's a matter of discipline, as he mentions discipline in verses 11 and 12, whether God disciplines you, trying to get your attention, trying to say, hey, you need to stop this, you're going on here. God can use it for discipline, or he can have other reasons of depriving the faithful, such as you see in Job's case. Job is a righteous man, but what happened? Job gets just beat to a pulp. Why? God is doing something in Job's life. He's doing something with Job's life that we as the readers are privy to, but Job's not. You see, so he's saying that God can have reasons for doing things that you and I may not recognize. So it could be discipline, it could be some other purpose. Derek Kidner comments, he says, the generalization that piety brings plenty chimes in with much of Scripture, Deuteronomy 28, 1-14, Malachi 3:10, and of experience. If it were more than a generalization, as Job's comforters held, God would be not so much honored as invested in by our gifts. Now, that's the way you see a lot of people on television do this. You see, it is, you do things and God will give you, so it's basically he's an investment opportunity. And typically that investment goes through their ministry. But you see, you have to understand that this is a general proposition. It's not this kind of law thing. And so God may have a reason for saying, because you think that way, I'm going to discipline you and I'm not going to give you a material abundance, you see. It's more complicated than they would like to make out. Now, the son is urged in verses 11 and 12 to remain open to the Lord's correction. Which correction? It can be direct, but correction can also be communicated by a teacher of wisdom, in this case, the father. You see, who then is acting as God's instrument. as God's agent in bringing the correction, in bringing God's teaching into your life. And correction, it's an act of love that's designed to benefit its object. So it's foolish to turn a deaf ear or a blind eye to correction, because that deprives one of the benefit of the correction. And yet that happens a lot. And we even talk about correction as though somehow it's mean. And it's not mean, it's loving, because you're trying to help people and bless them. See, wisdom is learned, and discipline serves that process. So he tells the son that. In Proverbs 3:13-20, he says, "Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than gain from silver, and her profit better than gold. She's more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand. In her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her. Those who hold her fast are called blessed. The Lord by wisdom founded the earth. By understanding he established the heavens. By his knowledge the deeps broke open and the clouds dropped down their dew." So this poem, it pronounces a blessing on those who find wisdom, which is again personified as a woman. So here you have this blessing on those who find wisdom, and it serves to encourage the readers to begin their quest for wisdom. This is something that we have to start on. We have to want. We have to seek after. So it is encouraging the readers to begin that quest. And verses 14 and 15, they say that wisdom is of greater value than such precious and expensive items as gold, silver, pearls, or jewels. Well, that's significant, isn't it? Do you believe it? When God reveals that, do you believe that's the truth? If we believe that, then do we not pursue it eagerly? And that's what he's trying to get the readers to do. Now, Solomon realized this, right? That's why he chose wisdom over wealth. You remember in 1 Kings chapter 3. Now, verses 16 to 18, they connect wisdom to a long and blessed life. You see, her great value is explained there in terms of some benefits that are associated with acquiring her. So you have it's a tremendous benefit, tremendous value, more than gold, more than these things. And then he expands on this idea by showing, you see, some of the benefits that are associated with acquiring her. And here's what Longman says: wisdom is the insight into life and the way the world works, so that people avoid the pitfalls that might lead to an early death or a damaged reputation. They also allow one to have the insight that will accrue in great material wealth. In this passage, the sage wants to motivate people to pursue wisdom. Other passages will grapple with the fact that some wise people are not wealthy, healthy, and powerful, while some wicked people are. Psalm 73 and Ecclesiastes. Okay, that's why I said you have to read these things together. Otherwise, you can focus on one thing and you can get out of balance and make things ironclad laws and principles that are not. But it is something here. Wisdom, we see, is something that is valuable, something that is to be pursued. And in verses 19 and 20, they speak of wisdom's role in creation, which I think is interesting. Creation didn't happen by chance. Despite what all these guys are telling you who run, the mandarins of our culture, that, we came from nowhere out of nothing by chance. Creation didn't happen by chance. Creation was a product of God's thought and purpose. It is an expression of God's wisdom. And that's further motivation. You say, why is he saying that? That's further motivation for acquiring wisdom. She's divine insight into how the created world works. If you want skill in living in the created world, well, wisdom was there, and wisdom is someone who's active. This personification, God's wisdom, is used in creating the world. So wouldn't you want to be in touch with her to know how to successfully navigate this created world? Yeah, that's a great resume thing for wisdom. Wisdom's there in creation. So you see, that's what it is. It's to encourage this pursuit, that you need to be pursuing wisdom. She's that divine insight. So knowing her will lead to blessing and spare one much trouble and heartache. You can go through people you know and look in their lives and see if they had turned a different way here, there, and you see all of these things that cascade, all of these foolish choices and decisions where they jettisoned wisdom and went their own path, and then it has this effect. And you see, and you stand back and look and say, that was, you shouldn't have done that. And that is what you, as I've said, you as parents try with your children to give them wisdom for living. Well, here we have God giving it to us. God is here giving us this wisdom. We have in 3:21 to 35. He says, "My son, do not lose sight of these. Keep sound wisdom and discretion, and they will be life for your soul and adornment for your neck. Then you will walk on your way securely, and your foot will not stumble. If you lie down, you will not be afraid. When you lie down, your sleep will be sweet. Do not be afraid of sudden terror or of the ruin of the wicked when it comes, for the Lord will be your confidence and will keep your foot from being caught. Do not withhold good from those to whom it is due when it is in your power to do it. Do not say to your neighbor, 'Go and come again, tomorrow I'll give it,' when you have it with you. Do not plan evil against your neighbor who dwells trustingly beside you. Do not contend with a man for no reason when he's done you no harm. Do not envy a man of violence, and do not choose any of his ways. For the devious person is an abomination to the Lord, but the upright are in his confidence. The Lord's curse is on the house of the wicked, but he blesses the dwelling of the righteous. Toward the scorners he is scornful, but to the humble he gives favor. The wise will inherit honor, but fools get disgrace." Verses 21 and 22. The father urges his son to keep and protect sound wisdom or sound judgment. Keep and protect sound wisdom and discretion. And the result of doing so will be that they will be a blessing and adornment for his life. You hold on to these things. You keep these things. And they will be a blessing and an adornment for your life. The blessing and adornment then are stated more particularly in verses 23 through 25. See, fruit of wisdom and fruit of wisdom's related concept includes safety and confidence. That's part of the fruit of wisdom. See, the Lord provides these to those who walk in his way, to those who live according to his life map. He provides these things. One's not always looking over one's shoulder. You see, you're wondering when one's foolish ways will catch up to one. You see, when you live according to God's life map, it's not always every time the phone rings or somebody rings the doorbell, is it some fruit of how I've been living coming home to roost. You're free of that. So who doesn't want that? And this is what he's trying to get across to them. You see that they wind up, they don't have to worry about that. Then in verses 27 to 31, they're examples of living sound wisdom and discretion. Verses 27 to 28, these are connected. 27 and 28 are connected, and together they speak of not withholding from one's neighbor whatever helpful thing to which that neighbor is entitled within the understood obligations of neighborliness, kindness, and charity. Don't withhold from one's neighbor whatever that neighbor is entitled to within these understood obligations that exist of neighborliness, kindness, and charity. Don't blow him off with some excuse because you don't want to give him what you should give him. That's what this is here. Go home tomorrow and I'll give it. Well, that's obviously a blow-off. You've got it, but you don't want to give it to him. And it's understood that in this context, it is something that should be given to the neighbor as part of kindness, as part of neighborliness. And so he's warning them not to do that, not to blow the person off. Verse 29 says not to plan evil against one's neighbor, violating his rightful expectation that you will act neighborly toward him. Well, how long do you have to live to recognize that, yeah, that's right. You start mistreating your neighbor and being a jerk to your neighbor, and it doesn't redound, well to you. It's not good. Your life becomes less enjoyable because your neighbor then starts doing what? Starts after you, plotting you, calling the cops on you, doing all this stuff. You see, well, this is wisdom, that you don't do that thing. Verse 30 is aimed at making a false accusation against others. That's a foolish course because it produces nothing but strife. When you go after somebody for no reason, you just come up with something and go after somebody, what do you think comes from that? You may think it makes you feel better. You may say this guy rubbed you or something and you just want to go after him. But it's foolish. You see, it produces bad things. Verse 31 indicates that sound wisdom and discretion, they involve resisting the temptation to choose violence as a way to get what one wants. That is a temptation, right? I mean, you're bigger and stronger than somebody. Guys, you're bigger and stronger than most women. You get what you want. I say most. Most women throw me in a trash can. But you see, but in any situation, this idea there's a temptation to use violence. And though it seems sometimes that violence yields rewards in this life, you can see that in Psalm 73, right? This idea of how it sometimes appears that the violent, what are they? They're gangsters or whatever they're doing. They're beating people up, robbing people around. They're driving big cars, they're doing all this kind of stuff. Looks like that's an answer. And a lot of young kids grow up seeing that as, oh, that's really the way to live. That's the way to actually succeed in this world, is by violence, because violence will get you stuff that you want. Somebody else has something you want, go and steal it from them. Pull a gun on them if you need to. Hit them with something if you need to. Take whatever they have. And he's warning against that temptation. See, it seems sometimes that violence yields rewards, but in reality it's a fool's path. That is a fool's path, and that is something that he's instilling here in his son. Verses 32 to 35 are motivations for living the life of wisdom rather than the life of folly that's as illustrated in verses 27 to 31. So here we have this motivations. The devious, the wicked, the mockers or the scorners are an abomination to, and they are cursed and scorned by God. Now that's pretty important, isn't it? I mean, this is who they are. They think they're actually doing something. They think they're gaining something. And what they are is they're an abomination to, and they are cursed and scorned by God. The upright, the righteous, the humble, they're in the Lord's confidence. They are blessed, and they receive favor. As summarized in verse 35, the wise will inherit or possess honor, but the fool gets, or the fool exudes, disgrace. I mean, well, there it is. Wisdom yields inheriting honor. The other produces disgrace. So he's trying to get them to see, listen, this is how we're to live, and this is important. And in chapter 4, verses 1 to 9, this call to embrace wisdom. Hear, O sons, a father's instruction, and be attentive, that you may gain insight. For I give you good precepts. Do not forsake my teaching. When I was a son with my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, he taught me and said to me, let your heart hold fast my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom, get insight. Do not forget and do not turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her, and she will keep you. Love her, and she will guard you. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. And whatever you get insight. Prize her highly, and she will exalt you. She will honor you if you embrace her. She will place on your head a graceful garland. She will bestow on you a beautiful crown. Further urging for the sons to embrace the way of wisdom. The urging is done by highlighting the benefits that wisdom will bring to one's life. He's done this before. He's doing it again. The Father calls them in verses 1 and 2 to heed His teaching, because His teaching is able to give them insight. And then verses 3 through 9, He recounts for His sons what He, as one loved by His parents. You see, that's what this is when He sits here and He says, when I was a son and my father, tender, the only one in the sight of my mother, He's there, you see, He's expressing their affection for Him. He's expressing how much they love Him. Here, this idea of the mother's fondness for Him. The only one in the sight of His mother. Father, tender, the only one inside of His mother. So He's saying to them, He recounts that for His sons, that He, as one who was loved by His parents, what He'd been taught by His Father. They taught me this because they loved me and cared for me. That is why they pass this to me. Implication, that is why I'm giving it to you. And as I learned and listened to them and have benefited from them, you need to learn and listen from me and likewise benefit from me. So this bolsters his appeal to his own son. He says his father had urged him to heed his words as a source of wisdom and thus as a path to blessed living. He told him if he would embrace wisdom, that she would guard, exalt, honor, and adorn him. That is what his father had told him in the statement in verse 7. The beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Well, that probably means, in Kidner's words, what it takes is not brains or opportunity, but a decision. Do you want it? Come and get it. You see, that's the idea. And do you see how much he's working throughout these 9 chapters to instill in us as readers of the book the significance, the importance, the blessing of obtaining wisdom, absorbing this, internalizing it, making it second nature. So this is my character. This is how I conduct myself in the world. It will benefit your life. You can't just blow through it, put the book away, and that's it. That's true of all of Scripture, by the way. See, but that's what's going on here. That's what he's doing. The beginning of wisdom is the commitment to its pursuit, which commitment flows from fear of the Lord, as he said in verse 7, chapter 1, verse 7. From an acknowledgement of God's supremacy, an acknowledgement of God's greatness, a submission to His will for life. From that flows this pursuit of wisdom that he's saying is something that we need, something that will bless us, something that will benefit us. And then he speaks of staying on the right path in Proverbs 4, 10-19. He says, hear, my son, and accept my words, that the years of your life may be many. I have taught you the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of uprightness. When you walk, your step will not be hampered, and if you run, you will not stumble. Keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of the evil. Avoid it. Do not go on it. Turn away from it and pass on. For they cannot sleep unless they've done wrong. They are robbed of sleep unless they've made someone stumble. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day. The way of the wicked is like deep darkness. They do not know over what they stumble. Here he says in verses 10-12, the Father urges the Son to heed His words, the wisdom He has imparted that is the upright path, so that things will go well with him. This is what he wants. This is what you want for your children. This is what God wants for his children. So that things will go well in verses 13 to 19. The focus is on guarding the wisdom one has acquired. You see, it's not simply heeding. It's not simply catching on and getting it and say, okay, it's guarding what one has already obtained. Staying the course in the midst of temptations to abandon that wisdom, to abandon the path of wisdom, the course of wisdom. Once you have it, the fight's not over. Once you see it, once you heed it, you have to struggle to hold on to it because there are all kinds of forces that are trying to convince you to surrender it, to go back to living like a fool. All kinds of things like that. Longman remarks, he says, this shows that wisdom is not a once-for-all decision, but involves a lifetime of commitment and rededication. However enticing the path of evil may appear. And look, it can be made to appear. Just turn on television. And I don't care if you want to look at the commercials, the message of the shows, I don't care. Just turn on television or go to a movie and tell me that evil can't be made enticing. That's all. See, that's all it is. These are nothing but sermons that are being preached non-stop to a culture, and it is saying, God is not real. God doesn't matter. You only go around once. You choose what you want and live for yourself. That's all that you're getting. And so, see, the path of evil can be made to appear very enticing. But however enticing it's made to appear, God lets us know that it leads to trouble and heartache and thus is a fool's path. It's not dressed up as a fool's path because the enemy's smarter than that. The enemy doesn't come in and say, going against God and charting your own course and doing these things will wind up throwing your life in a commode. You only find that after you bite. After you go. You'll find out. But he doesn't come and parade that. He doesn't say this is how it works. 4:20 to 27. My son, be attentive to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Let them not escape from your sight. Keep them within your heart. For they are life to those who find them and healing to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all vigilance, for from it flow the springs of life. Put away from you crooked speech and put devious talk far from you. Let your eyes look directly forward and your gaze be straight before you. Ponder the path of your feet, then all your ways will be sure. Do not swerve to the right or to the left. Turn your foot away from evil. He says here in 4:20 to 27, the father here he again encourages his son to strive to stay on the right path. He must not only heed the words, heed the sayings, he must hold on to them. He must not let them escape his sight, and he must keep them within his heart. He has to work to do that, for these are words of life and healing. It's not a trivial thing. It's not, yeah, so what? It's not. It is significant, and it has tremendous implications for your life. And he urges his son in verse 23 to keep or guard his heart with all vigilance. Because the heart, see, from the innermost personality, from the core being, flows the spring of life. One must preserve the integrity of one's heart. One must keep one's heart submissive to God, because the heart sets the course of one's life. This core being, this core personality, who you are on the deepest inside, this winds up, you see, setting the course of your life. It determines one's conduct. And thus it has to be kept clear of evil intentions. That's why he says be vigilant about it. Serious, alert, on guard. Don't be casual. What you breathe in, what you start becoming, Don't let that happen. And as part of the process of guarding his heart, the son is to keep his distance from smooth talkers, from those who through crooked speech and devious talk threaten one's heart. You see how that works, right? I mean, that's what gets in. These ideas and these thoughts and these things that these smooth talk, oh, this is really what's cool. This is really something. And you're over here going, I don't know, so here, tell me more. Tell me more. Tell me more. You see? It's almost hypnotic. But he says you steer clear of that. You stay away from that kind of thing because that threatens your heart. One is to focus on God's way and not be distracted or diverted from that way. The son is to be aware of where he's walking so he can stay on course. In other words, he's not just to bop along, oblivious to how he's living in relation to the life God calls him to lead. There is to be ongoing assessment, ongoing monitoring of your life. How are you living? What are you doing? How has God called me to live? You don't just get these things, put them aside, and then bop along oblivious to how you're living. There is this constant monitoring, you see. He wants his son to do that because he seeks to bless his son. He needs to be aware of where he is, that he not swerve from the path. You see, it's easy if you aren't thinking about it, if you're just bopping along and you're not reflecting on where am I in the life that God calls me to live, well, then it's easy to veer off and not think. You're over here and you're not looking, oh. See, I'm thinking, how does God, what is the person God calls me to be? What is the wisdom God gives me to bless my life? Oh, I see these, oh, no, I'm going to come here. See, it is a disciplined life. It is a discipline. It's not a casual life. Just, well, I'm just kind of bopping along. I don't have any worries. I don't care about anything. I don't want to think about how God calls me because that, requires some effort on my part. Well, he's telling his son that's not how it's to be. Now, chapter 5, 1 to 23. Okay, we'll see how far we get with this. My son, be attentive to my wisdom. Incline your ear to my understanding, that you may keep discretion and your lips may guard knowledge. For the lips of a forbidden woman drip honey, and her speech is smoother than oil. But in the end, she is bitter as wormwood, sharp as a two-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps follow the path to Sheol. She does not ponder the path of life. Her ways wander, and she does not know it. And now, O sons, listen to me, and do not depart from the words of my mouth. Keep your way far from her, and do not go near the door of her house, lest you give your honor to others and your years to the merciless, lest strangers take their fill of your strength and your labors go to the house of a foreigner. And at the end of your life you groan when your flesh and body are consumed, and you say, how I hated discipline, and my heart despised reproof. I did not listen to the voice of my teachers, or incline my ear to my instructors. I'm at the brink of utter ruin in the assembled congregation. Drink water from your own cistern, flowing water from your own well. Should your springs be scattered abroad, streams of water in the streets? Let them be for yourself alone and not for strangers with you. Let your fountain be breast, and rejoice in the wife of your youth, a lovely deer, a graceful doe. Let her breast fill you at all times with delight. Be intoxicated always in her love. Why should you be intoxicated, my son, with a forbidden woman, and embrace the bosom of an adulteress? For a man's ways are before the eyes of the Lord, and he ponders all his paths. The iniquities of the wicked ensnare him, and he's held fast in the cords of his sin. He dies for lack of discipline, and because of his great folly, he is led astray. Now, the power and the danger of illicit sexual relationships. Do I even have to announce this in our culture? The power and danger of illicit sexual relationships. He's already noted this in chapter 2, verses 16 to 17. But here is the first of 3 large blocks in the first 9 chapters of Proverbs addressing this question addressing this issue. You get it here in 5, 1 to 23. You get it in chapter 6, verse 20 to 35. You get it in chapter 7, verses 1 to 27. You have these 3 blocks addressing this. So clearly this temptation of illicit sexual relations has a huge potential to derail one's life. He says it in 2. He has 3 large blocks of it. It has a huge potential to derail a person's life. After getting his son's attention and urging him to listen up for his own benefit, in verses 1 and 2, the father warns the son not to get sexually involved with a strange, or as the ESV translates it, forbidden woman, meaning one who's morally aberrant. That's the strange idea I talked about before. Morally aberrant, who's immoral, or someone to whom one has no right to a sexual relationship. Don't get involved with her. Son, I'm telling you, don't get involved. You have to steer clear from her. He says in verse 3 that her lips drip honey and her palate is smoother than oil, which refers, see, to flattering speech that feeds the ego. He understands how this works. Here comes this woman, this beautiful woman, and she's up here feeding your ego and telling you, oh man, my boyfriend, my husband, he doesn't understand me. You listen so well. You're just okay, do you see what I'm saying to you? Feeding the male ego. He says, yes, I see that's how this operates. That you wind up, she has this lips like oil, or like honey, and the palate's like oil, this flattering speech. But it also probably, by the way, serves as a double entendre that refers to the pleasure of physical contact with her. You see this idea of lips like honey and palate smooth as oil. But in any event, certainly flattering speech, but also probably alludes to this sense of, the pleasure of physical contact. This is a powerful, powerful pull. But despite how pleasurable and satisfying a sexual relationship with her may appear, the truth expressed in verse 4 is that illicit sexual relationships produce tremendous pain. Only God knows. It's like how I feel about alcohol in this society. I'm not one of those who thinks that it's sinful per se to drink alcohol. I'm talking about drunkenness in our society. Only God knows the true cost of that. Okay, well, this is how this is. Only God is in a position to know the true cost of illicit sexual relationships. If you knew, you think, like with alcohol, if you knew all the fights and the relationships that are destroyed, the robberies, the muggings, all the employment that's lost, all the injuries and accidents and deaths and murders, well, I'm telling you, this is going to be in the same category. There are all kinds of ramifications from illicit sexual relationships that we don't appreciate, but they wind up destroying and ripping and shredding and harming. And he wants his son to know this. Now, he understands. I heard that bell. He understands. You see how powerful this is, and that's why it's harped on. And I don't have to, as they say, a dude, I am one. Okay? So, guys, you know how powerful this is. That's why it's talked about so much, and that's why it said, you get near this, you got to be careful. You have to be careful because there's big pull here. Big pull. Okay, thanks for coming.